There it is. There it goes. All right. So thank you very much, Brian, for being here. I'm very happy that you're here. I've been watching your videos for a while now, and you've taught me a lot about, the Peruvian culture, and of course the Egyptian culture, a lot. So, but first, I want to start talking to you about the Paracas skulls, the elongated skulls that were found by Julio Teo, right? Julio Tejo.
Hmm.
I wanted to first ask you if they were all found in the same pit or the same area, or were they scattered around Paracas?
There are four major ancient cemeteries of the Paracas.
Mm,
The ones that he found were at a site called Cerro Colorado, which is in the Paracas Peninsula, but he actually didn't find the largest elongated skulls, which are in a different cemetery.
mm. So there were the largest ones were all separated on a different cemetery, you're saying?
Yeah, they're in a cemetery that's about 10 to 20 hectares in size, and it's located about about 40 kilometers from where Teo was doing his excavations. He never
Mm,
knew that site existed.
wow. And I always see the skulls, but there don't seem to be a lot of bodies, right? Found of the
Well,
Paracas.
unfortunately, the skulls are quite prized by the black market and collectors. So people have a tendency, when they do an excavation, they'll take any gold or silver jewelry or pottery, and then some of them will take the skull too, because they think that they know they can sell it on the black market illegally for up to $1,000 US.
I've seen that there were sometimes skulls on in restaurants too, right? Just like right there, an exposition or somewhere, and then I think there was in Peru that there was like a little niche where there was a Paracas skull that there. I don't know if it was a restaurant or what it was, that someone then stole it from the area.
Yeah, unfortunately that happens. I think there's a restaurant in Lima that has some of them on display in a restaurant, and there are lots of private collections and things like that. I live very close to where the cemeteries are, so that's why I get special access to skulls and other artifacts when they show up.
So since Julio has excavated there, there hasn't been any more recent discoveries on the Paracas, just the ones that he found back in the day.
No, there were more excavations done in the 1960s, but not that much. He was the one who made the first discovery and named the culture the Paracas. He was the father of South American archaeology, but recently there's been very little, especially governmental excavations of any kind. So the discoveries that I make are from local people who literally, dig things up in their
Dig.
backyard, or yeah, or know where some of these ancient cemeteries are.
So if you have permission from the landlords, can you dig yourself, or do you have to have governmental permission, or do you have to give half to the government when you find stuff? Like
No,
what happens in Europe.
no, technically what happens is that you have any discovery you make that's pre-Columbian has to be given to the government. You're not allowed to keep anything.
Not anything at all.
No.
Whoa. Okay. So another question that I had was that if all the Paracas, skulls were found in a niche, or were they, buried in some sort of, ritualistic manner, or were they all just, thrown in there together?
No, the ones, especially the ones that Teo found, were actually buried in um, like family cemeteries in the bedrock. So sometimes they would be as much as 20 feet deep, and over the generations, dead family members would be bundled very ceremoniously and be lowered down to be added to their, the rest of the family that are in there.
So they would carve into the bedrock.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought they were like inside, dirt. Wow, that's crazy. So another question that I had was, um, a lot of the anomalies that you talk about, the Paracas skulls, that they don't have the forum magnum or foramen magnum. I don't know how it's pronounced, and that the uh, The foramen magnum, my bad. The foramen magnum is the one that connects our spinal cord to our head, right? It would be
Right.
more in the center than what we have it, or would it be more to the back side
It's
of their
more,
heads?
yeah, it's back by as much as 2.5 centimeters. So
Two
obviously
centimeters
that,
more?
yeah, or 2.5. So that's a genetic thing. That's not head binding.
And of course the sagittal suture is not present in what would be the pure Paracas, right?
Yeah, the original Paracas did not have a sagittal suture. That's been, that's been documented now by quite a few people that I've been in contact with. Over the course of time, as they bred with normal looking people, then the sagittal suture would start to show up and the skulls would start to shrink in size. And, normal Native American characteristics would take over.
I had seen a Paracas skull that had the number 6 on it, and it said, I believe, a Chongas Cemetery, and it didn't have the sagittal suture nor the one that goes in front. I don't remember the suture that the one that goes horizontally in front of the head. Is that another anomaly, or what, or would that be genetic also? Because I've seen Paracas without the sagittal suture and some with no sutures at all.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that before. I've seen some. I think it's called the coronal suture that comes
The
across
coronal
this
suture,
way, and
exactly.
I've seen some where it's very, very slight,
Mm.
like not obvious.
Also, that's
Yeah.
probably what I'd seen. And in a medical sense, how would the cranial capacity grow as the Paracas people were growing in size without the sagittal suture? Because we know that when children have the hole in their head, that's because the sagittal suture is closing up while the skull is growing, right?
Yeah, actually, I met a brain surgeon, American brain surgeon, about 3 years ago, and he said the lack of the sagittal suture would have caused the skulls to become that cone head-like shape.
Uh-huh.
That was his professional opinion, which makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And when I'd seen, I think I'd seen a video of you with a lady that was doing the reconstruction of the faces of the so-called Paracas people in History Channel, and that they were
Mhm.
giving them like Mesoamerican or Incan style type facial features. Was that something that the artist added to themselves, or was that something that would actually be true to the faces of the people in practice, or would they have been more like Caucasian type, or Caspian, Black Sea? I know they come from the Caspian and Black Sea. They have the genes from over there, I think, right?
Yeah, well, the thing is, she's done a number of reconstructions. First, she did them digitally, and then she did them physically on top of copies of actual skulls. So her more recent stuff does look more Caucasian. She's included lighter skin. And so, yeah, in the beginning, they looked very much like they were Incan or Native American, but her most recent one, her name is Marcia K. Moore, if you want to look her up on the internet. And
Hmm.
her latest one is called Cinnamon. And that's,
Cinnamon,
yeah, that's the one that looks more, you know, Eurasian looking.
Eurasian, yeah. And so one of the questions that I had was by one of my subscribers was if that if they had a higher cranial capacity, would that give them higher mental powers, let's say, right? Or would that have nothing to do with the cranial capacity of the being?
No, we think with a greater cranial capacity, like 25% more than normal, that would give them higher intellect, possibly higher psychic abilities, but definitely, the extra brain matter wasn't there for nothing. And that's one of the major
Exactly.
anomalies about them is that increased cranial volume.
So basically, when I speak to people about the Paracas skulls, they always say, no, well, they were doing cranial deformation. That's it. There's nothing like biological about the skulls in this matter. How would I respond to them? I always say, no, it's they have these anomalies, all of them. It's not just one or two. It's most of them have these anomalies, these biological anomalies with them. Well, how would I respond to them if they just say,
Well,
it was just cranial deformation?
well, it's the first number of generations that show the characteristics of a lack of a sagittal suture, and I've had 30, 40, 50 foreign medical professionals look at these in person. They can't explain that. Also, the fact that the foramen magnum is 2.5 centimeters back from where it is means that the skull, because the shape was elongated, that was what nature did in order to help to balance the head. Also, the eye sockets are larger than normal. There are two little holes in the back of the skull, which are called foramen, and they're for blood and nerve flow. The
We
jaw
don't have
is
those,
much,
right?
no, we don't have that. And also the jaw is much bigger than normal. So those characteristics by themselves are indicating that these were not normal Homo sapiens sapiens. The whole head binding thing came, as I said, as the Paracas started to breed with more normal looking people.
Hmm.
The shape, over generations, the shape wants to approach a normal shape. So the head binding was begun to maintain the look of this nobility class, which is what they were. They were not the common people. They were the high end of the nobility of the people.
So when you speak to a medical professional or something, can they, based on the skull themselves, give you an idea of how the body would look, or do you have to have some piece of the body to give an example of the size, or how big they were, or were they skinny, small
Well,
people?
actually, one characteristic that a number of American academics pointed out was that the foramen magnum, again, which is where the spinal column enters the skull, is about half the diameter of normal. So that they believe that the necks would be thin and much longer than normal. And we've been
Oh,
able to calculate that the Paracas were somewhere between 5'10" and 6 feet tall, so much taller than
oh, they were
a
tall.
native, yeah, than a native person, that we commonly think of from this area.
And when you said you've done the genetic testing, and it said that it came back from the Caspian and Black Sea, um, from skulls of the Caspian and Black Sea. Were those people native to that area too, the Caspian and Black Sea people, or was that another anomalous group of people found in the Caspian and Black Sea?
Well, they were found there, so we believe that they were native to the area. And as you said, the genetics are basically the same between the Paracas and those people. The latest DNA testing which is on actually a relatively recent Gaia TV program, states that quite emphatically too. So it's not just me who's making these statements. The more that especially foreign academics look at this, the more they're reinforcing what it is that I've been saying for quite a while.
So how hasn't this, revolutionized the whole Homo sapien theory, the genetic evolution of the humans from lower species of hominids to what we are now? Why hasn't this been mainstream? Is it like a cover up or something, or is it because academics, because there's some anomalous group of people, they just they don't look at it?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, and I'm not going to give up on it. I'm going to continue with this. So it's just a question of getting more and more evidence, which is what you need in order to make others look at this, seriously.
And what about the people in Paracas or Peru? Do they view these people as, higher beings, or were they, saying also, no, it's just cranial deformation, or do they accept this in, more cultural context, like they were a different species that did mingle with the Incan people?
Well, actually, the Paracas people who live today, they don't care about the subject at all. I've literally walked, no, I've literally walked down the street with an elongated skull in my hands, and I haven't had one local person even look at me or look at it.
They
So
don't,
they're
they don't.
preoccupied with, they're just preoccupied with, with living their lives, I guess, or something. But the important thing is that it's foreign scientists and foreign academics who are showing more and more interest. The DNA testing that we did when we had our major study we had to have a Peruvian archaeologist in charge of it. And then when we went, I sent him the results, which he wasn't happy about because they didn't conform to what he wanted. And so when we approached him again and said, "We'd like to do some more testing," he said no, because every sample you took obviously was contaminated, which isn't true.
Contaminated.
Yeah.
And how far back would these skulls, date?
Most suggest about 2,800 years ago.
2,800. And the Incas were around 1,000, right? 1,500.
Yeah, 1,000 to 1,500.
Okay, so they would be predecessors of the Incas. And another thing that I was talking about with some people when I was discussing the Paracas skulls is that they were, just noble Incan people that, of course, they done the head binding and head wrapping, and that all of the because I'd seen some of the Paracas have some medical implants put on their heads, a metal plating or drill holes that would be done. And one of my subscribers that is actually studying medicine, or I think I think he's studying to become a brain surgeon, I believe. And he'd said that he'd seen on one of the practice skulls that they would cut the holes on the on the skulls, of course, and then leave a small what would be a sort of a lip to have a sort of space to be able to sit the metal pieces on top of the head, which is a really advanced technique that would require specialized tools. Have you ever had a conversation about that with any medical expert?
Oh, sure. Because yeah, what would happen is when they would do the brain surgery, they would put either almost like a paper thin piece of gold or silver on top, and then and then of course put some kind of padding or surgical material cloth on top of it to stop the bleeding. And then over the course of time, the bone underneath would start to grow back, because there was a study done by an American scientist of I think 250 skulls that had trepanation or brain surgery from the Paracas, and more than 50% of them survived more than 6 months. So obviously, as you said, you would have to have advanced knowledge to be able to do that. And the fact that more than 50% survived at least 6 months, if not several years, is pretty mind-boggling for a so-called Stone Age people.
Exactly. That's why I don't understand how people don't talk about this. It's it's
Yeah.
advanced medicine. It's a very advanced medicine what they're doing, right? And
Mhm.
most of them would be, most of the people that I would talk to also would say, they would be going through excruciating pain, or they would be using stone tools and or copper chisels and to be hammering in the brain, but they have no proof of that, right? It could
No,
be
it's
advanced medicine with anesthesia, right?
yeah, well, anesthesia by coca leaves or coca extract, because that's an anesthetic. And then also we found a lot of obsidian tools in the Paracas archaeological sites, and that comes actually from the city of Arequipa, which is at least a couple of hundred miles, kilometers or miles away from Paracas. So there was an advanced trading system to be able to get hold of materials like that. And, they're super sharp. So they wouldn't be as painful as using something, like a copper chisel. These things are like razors.
Exactly.
So, we found a lot of them.
Another thing is, how would they build the tools, right? Because obsidian, if I'm not mistaken, is a very hard stone, right?
No, it's actually, it's not, it's hard, but it's very brittle. So if you
Oh, it's
have
brittle.
if you have something like granite, you would use that to do the actual shaping of it. First taking out big pieces and then little finer pieces, and then it naturally creates like a razor edge by itself.
Oh, okay. And when I was looking at the Paracas site, I know it seems to be on sort of like, close to the coastal line of Peru. Have you ever done, or do you know about anybody who's done, explorations on the coast or on the bottom of the, ocean surrounding the Paracas site that could, house some sort of constructions or anything that would be anomalous to the area?
Not that I know of, but yeah, the cemeteries are always very close to the coast or having a view of the coast for some reason. So they had a major attraction to the ocean because they were most likely navigators. That's likely how they found Paracas to begin with. There's a lot of evidence that we found of artifacts coming from Ecuador. So that would mean that they would be sailing north and then back south again, trading stuff from, that they had with people in Ecuador. So yeah, but yeah, what's actually in the Bay of Paracas? I don't know anybody who's done any scuba diving or scientific study underwater there yet.
Okay. And so what you just said about them looking at the coastline, could there be any connection to, the Easter Island area?
Well, the funny thing is that when I went to Easter Island the first time about 8 years ago, I took a copy of one of the Paracas skulls that was made out of clay or a ceramic, and gave it to the mayor of Easter Island. And this lady that I knew who made the connection said, those people used to live here. So there is evidence that there were elongated skull people who lived on Easter Island before the time of the Polynesians.
Oh, okay. So another thing that I would be observing when I looked at your videos when you go to Easter Island is that the construction is very similar, if not exactly the same. The few megalithic walls that are still remaining, on Easter Island look exactly the same as the ones that you find in, Cusco, right?
Yeah, very similar, very tight fitting walls. The stone is basalt, which is very hard, difficult to shape properly. So we do see evidence at 4 sites that there was an advanced technological civilization on Easter Island before the time of the Polynesians. And, the Polynesians built walls by simply stacking stones on top of each other. But there's one location called Vinapu that is super tight fitting stonework, like what we see, very similar to what we see in Cusco.
Another thing that I've seen is, I think, a commentary from Yusuf Awan, that he said that
Mhm.
that the good thing about Peru and all these sites is that they have these, direct contrast between the two styles of construction, whereas, in Egypt, it's been so long ago that the buildings were made, that so much stone was moved, so many people moved in and out of Egypt. That's really hard to, examine, but that in Peru, there's like, night and day difference between the construction of the Incan people and the pre-Incan civilization that you talk about, right? It's like
Yeah,
obvious,
that's
right?
right. No, it's night and day. And actually, if you travel through Egypt, you see something, kind of similar. You see the dynastic construction, which is in softer stone like limestone or sandstone. And then the older work is always in a harder material like granite or basalt. So yeah, the difference is that you don't see the two types of construction too much in Egypt in the exact same location, whereas you do in the highlands of Peru.
Exactly. So when you look at the construction that I was talking about in Peru, when a tour guide, a regular, Orthodox tour guide goes over there, what do they say in terms of the difference in construction?
Well, they call it Imperial Inca. That's the good
Imperial.
stuff. Imperial Inca, and then the rest is, the good thing is that more and more of the guides are watching my videos now. So when I go to Machu Picchu, I do have guides come up to me and say, "Oh, you're Brian Forster. Thank you for the videos, because now I see that this site is much more complicated than I was taught in school." And that's the problem. When they're taught in school, they're told by the Western mentality, academics, that all of it had to be Inca. They can't explain how it was done though, because they present copper chisels, and that we know that doesn't work. So they're trying to ignore it. But the good thing is that more and more younger Peruvians are waking up to the fact that their history is far more complicated than what they've been taught.
And it's way more fascinating also if you have an older history, and to just say it was just, Incan people 1,500 years ago. Another thing that I was thinking about is, have you ever been inside any, tunnel systems that they talk about? That would be the what was it called? that there's like a geometric forming geometric lines that conform the different areas that are around Peru and Bolivia that would be called the the path of the Viracocha, right? Is that what
Right.
it's called? Have you ever been inside any tunnel systems? Deep instead of
Uh,
the normal ones that are.
no, not deep ones. There are a couple of short ones that are at Sacsayhuaman that you can or could. Now it's off limits
It's
because
off
of
limits.
COVID at the moment. But
COVID.
there were a couple you could walk through that were one I would say is about 300 meters long. Then there's another one that's probably about 700 meters long. They look like they're
So,
natural, but they were obviously altered and expanded to make it easier for people to be able to maneuver through them. There is talk of a big tunnel that goes from Sacsayhuaman down to the city of Cusco, and that's been mapped by ground penetrating radar, so we know it does exist. And then other stories that there's one that goes from Tiwanaku to Cusco and other ancient sites that for some reason all go to Cusco because Cusco was the historic center of the Inca. So it's quite likely that Cusco itself is much, much older than the Inca.
and I don't know if you know this, maybe you do because been living there for a while now. But there was talks about in Cusco there being a solar disk. Do you know anything about that?
But what?
A solar disk.
Yeah, supposedly when the Spanish first entered Cusco, there was a massive solar disk, round shape, maybe at least 3 meters across, that the Inca were able to take down and hide before the Spanish arrived, because they heard that the Spanish were coming. So
Hmm.
that sacred object was supposedly hidden from them so that they couldn't take it because the Inca inherited that. They didn't make it.
Exactly.
So when the Spanish plundered Cusco, the Inca were obviously unhappy that they were stealing all the gold and silver, but the disc was supposedly taken to Lake Titicaca and has been hidden away from sight ever since that time.
And going back to the tunnel that they'd found with ground penetrating radar, why haven't they, excavated that? What is the official explanation of why they don't excavate it?
Well, the basic story is that it was a Spanish archaeologist who went to the Bishop of Cusco, and he knew that there was a tunnel system under that was called the Coricancha, which is the most sacred building. And the bishop allowed him to excavate. He just said, "Yeah, you can do that." But then when the Vatican found out, the Vatican sent word back that it was to be sealed up again. So that's what happened. Even in the Coricancha now, there are wooden planks on the floor where you can see where the entrance to the tunnel system is. But
Oh,
the Vatican itself decided that that was not something they wanted the outside world to know about.
so basically the Spanish conquistadors probably had looked into these sites, right? And gave, word back
Oh,
to the
almost likely.
Vatican.
Oh, sure, sure. Well, actually, no, this happened in the 1980s or 1990s that
Oh,
access was
1990s.
allowed by the bishop. And then the Vatican found out, and then the Queen of Spain actually came over and wasn't very happy about it either and said, no more excavations at this location.
So they seem to all know about these areas, right? And what the implications could be,
Exactly.
surrounding this.
Well, and the same story in Egypt. There's so many places that are off limits because they don't want you to know the fact that, there's a much older civilization that existed in Egypt too. So both these and many other places, where you have megalithic stuff, the governments are not very keen on having the public know about this stuff, but that's why I do what I do.
Exactly. So I'm going to segue to the area of Pumapunku, and I know that they have been excavating for at least at I think 1 or 1.5 meters down below the area of Pumapunku, right? And that there seem
Mhm.
to still be some stones coming out of the ground that seem to be, of course, precision made. And why wouldn't they also be excavating there? If there is obviously more things underground.
Well, it's the same story. It's the Aymara population, who are the people who live there. Their history goes back about 1,000 years. They insist that their ancestors did all of this work, and so the government doesn't want, people exposing the fact that obviously the Aymara or the Tiwanaku people who came before them did the really precision stonework. Also, I think a couple of years ago, they did ground penetrating radar with a drone, and they found out that Pumapunku is at least twice the size of what it is on the surface, that there are chambers underground that are solid. So also my friend Antonio Portugal, he did ground penetrating radar, I think in the late 80s, and they found that there was at least one massive chamber underneath Pumapunku, but excavation below 1.5 meters is still not allowed because they insist there's nothing there, even though we know there is.
So they can let you excavate, but not more than 1.5 meters down. That would be the official, authoritative.
Yeah, basically, that's as deep as they've gone, because they say they found sterile soil underneath it, but the ground
Sterile soil.
penetrating radar, well, the ground penetrating radar tells you that there has to be much more underneath. It's just they don't. I've even seen where they've done excavations relatively recently at Tiwanaku. They've exposed the giant stones under the surface, and then you go back 6 months later and they filled it back up again
fill it.
and actually added even more sand on top of it to hide what it is that they had found.
And would this be, illegal if you expose this in some manner, or
Well, I've done
is
it
it,
all. Well, I've actually done it already. Every time I've been to Tiwanaku and Pumapunku probably 60 times, and I film every time that I've been there. So, I've got a lot of videos out there showing, what it is that I've seen over the course of more than 10 years of them excavating and then filling back up again, moving massive stone blocks from one location to another, just out of aesthetics. For some reason, they decide to line things up in a row rather than showing you exactly where the stones originally were located. So the more time goes on, the more they're making a mess of that location.
Exactly. Yeah, because a lot of people think that, the original structure would be like this with all the H blocks one next to the other one, and in a horizontal manner, but the H blocks would be in different places, specific areas, right? Not just one next to the other one.
Yeah, there's only evidence that there were 9 H blocks anyway.
Oh, 9. All of them not being exactly the same, right?
No, they're not all the same shape and size. They're pretty close, but that blows the theory that they were poured in a mold or something like that, because they're all slightly different in terms of dimension. So each one was created by itself for some reason. And the idea that there were like 100 or 1,000 of them in a big wall doesn't make any sense, because I've only seen 8.5 of them. There are none in, well, the local town, which is right next door. A lot of the foundations of the colonial Spanish buildings are made from Pumapunku stone, but you don't see any H blocks or anything like that in the foundation. You see regular sized blocks because they wanted to use normal looking stone. They didn't want to have to shape this stuff, which is a very hard material, in order to be able to make something simple like a foundation. Also, the cathedral in La Paz in Bolivia supposedly has some of Pumapunku stone in it, but again, you don't see anything irregular. You just see big blocks that were used in the walls and foundations.
And what would be the official explanation of the Pumapunku site? What would it be? What would it be? Had it been used for?
Well, they say it was a ceremonial site, which of course is what they label everything. Everything's a temple, just like in Egypt. Everything's a temple. And it's like, I don't think so. I think these people had more imagination to be able to make things other than simply, of course, now they're temples, but the original reason for their construction is probably completely different from what the standard archaeology story is.
So all archaeologists, I've always seen this too, that they always say they're temples, 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 but hasn't anyone said, why would they be using such precise, objects in the temples, right? Why wouldn't they just, do a square floor with, square blocks and normal stone, not too hard stones? And why would they be using 9 different types of H blocks, 9, different forms inside well, basically what we've seen in Pumapunku is just, the first layer, right? There could be way higher pieces of a rock underground. And
Oh, yeah.
if you were to go to Pumapunku and take a core drill sample, would that be legal? Right, going
No,
outside of the
no.
area?
Well, outside of the area, yeah, you can take samples because they also used dynamite at Pumapunku when they were building the railroad. So they blew the stones up in order to make filler for the rail bed.
Oh my God.
And I think that was in the 1920s or something like that. So that poor site has been abused ever since, well, for about 500 years, used as a quarry.
So if you were to go a little bit farther away from the site and take a drill sample, there would be no problem about that, right? With that?
Yeah, actually, there's a restaurant that we go to quite often that's about a quarter of a kilometer away. And in their backyard, they have remnants of Pumapunku. So the site itself, as I said, is bigger than what they say it is.
It's
And
massive.
I know the restaurant owner quite well because he's a fan of Ancient Aliens. So he would
Oh,
allow me
great.
to take samples if I wanted.
Oh, you should take them, and if you do find any of the dead soil that you're talking about, that would be another evidence for something going on at the site, not just that would not be just a sacred site. It'd be a mechanical use of the site, maybe, if the soil is
Yeah,
dead, which is also
yeah.
found in Tanis, right? When you go to Tanis, the soil
Uh,
is dead over there, right?
well, the difference is that at Pumapunku, they dug down 1.5 meters, and they said, they'd find artifacts and bones and things as they were digging down. Then once they reach about 1.5 meters, all of a sudden, all there is the soil. So that's why they said there's nothing underneath it, because they didn't find artifacts at that point. But my simple question is, why don't you dig deeper and prove that the
Exactly.
ground penetrating radar is wrong? And they just won't do it, you know.
Like Zaki Hawass said that he doesn't believe in radar.
Yeah, that's right.
The scientific method is implemented with those guys over there. Another question that I had, well, not that I had, was it's a viewer of mine. He has a pretty big Instagram account. Also, he's Alien Info. He's called, and he said, "What's your favorite ancient artifact or location?"
That would be really hard to say. I guess still Pumapunku is probably the most mysterious one in Peru and Bolivia. And then Egypt, well, there's so many of them, but I guess Tanis is quite intriguing, but also the Osirian shaft on the Giza Plateau is very intriguing. They're still doing excavations and they're opening up sites in Egypt now that the public can go if they pay an extra amount of money. We were allowed in the site that's called the Osirian, which is much at Abydos, which is much bigger than what you think, because you're allowed to look down into it and you see this rectangular megalithic construction, but there's a whole hallway system that goes off one end. And when we were there in October, I was lucky enough that we rented it for 2 hours. And there was a guard at the end where there was a gate, and he opened up the gate for me and let me walk through. So I walked up a staircase to the upper surface, and it's much more complex than what most people think. Also, underneath the step pyramid at Saqqara, there's a major tunnel system, which is now open to the public if you pay extra. At least 6 kilometers, no, probably 10 kilometers of tunnels. So
And
that's why I keep going back.
how do they explain this? Why it's not just burial chambers. Why would you have 10 kilometers of tunnels for a burial site?
Well, they're actually not explaining it, which is the problem.
Wow.
So as I say, each time I go, they open up. There's something else we could pay for to have opened up. There's also a place called the Southern Tomb at Saqqara, which is a massive shaft going down into the ground with a giant, probably 500 ton box at the bottom made of several pieces. And there's a tunnel that goes off from there, but the gate was locked. But I know there's a whole system of tunnels that interconnect underneath in the bedrock around Giza and Saqqara, that all interconnecting. And as time goes on, they're opening up more and more of it to the, for us to have a look at. The main thing that you do is when you get access, you simply record as much as you can. You never post anything on social media while you're in Egypt. But once you leave Egypt, then you start making videos. And that's what I've been doing ever since I came back in October, because, if you're in Egypt and they catch you posting something that you're not supposed to, obviously they can arrest you there, but once you're back at home, it's kind of too late. And, so that's what I was told that by quite a few official friends of mine who are in Egypt. They just said a couple of years ago, don't post anything while you're here. When you're at home, it doesn't matter because it's too late. They can't track you down. And once it's on the internet, it doesn't, it doesn't matter because they can't erase it.
They can't take it down.
People copy it. Yeah, people copy it and put it on, which I don't mind at all. As long as I get to be the first one to put my own stuff up, then if it's copied in part or in full and posted elsewhere, then that spreads the information out, which is the whole function of the thing.
Exactly. So basically, when I look at Egypt, there are these areas, and when I find, well, not when I find, but when I look at the official burial chambers or pharaonic burials, when they find, all these, the what do they call them? I get the words in English, mixed up. The tombs, the sites, they all seem to be, thrown in there. They seem to put the casket, not the casket. What do they call where they put the pharaonic bodies in? The sarcophaguses. They put the sarcophagus inside the areas with a lot of, the royal person's belongings and stuff, but they seem to be thrown in niches or niches that were made before, right? Because it seems to be, like the Serapeum. There's like niches inside the areas, and then a lot of stuff thrown in there and a burial site. But when you look at areas like the Osiris shaft and those types of boxes, they call those a sarcophagi too, right?
Well, they do, and they're much bigger than a human being. I actually just posted a video this morning from my latest trip in the Valley of the Queens, where we're able to enter some of the ancient tombs, and there is a stone box in one of them, which is human size, which is what I pointed out, because the boxes in the Serapeum are much, much bigger than you would require for a normal looking person, up to 100 tons in size, 12, 14 feet long, that kind of thing. So that's the big difference, is that sarcophagi were usually made of wood, sometimes made of rough stone, and then contrast that with the very sophisticated ones we find, which are quite a bit bigger, that are highly polished, as I said, up to 100 tons. The stone has been transported from granite or from Aswan, which is in very southern Egypt. So, those are the pre-dynastic ones, the giant boxes. The dynastic ones are, it's easy to figure out how they were made, but the older stuff, very, very puzzling.
And what I've seen too in the Serapeum is that, some of the boxes do seem to have, indentations inside them, or like scoop marks. Would that have been an original feature, or do you think that happened later when they were discovered? Or because it seems to be like they have these scoop marks on them, but they're polished also. They should be rough if they were made later, right?
Yeah, exactly. For some reason, they're not perfectly flat. In some cases, they're not perfectly flat surfaces. They do have these these gouges in them, but as you said, they're highly polished, and the dynastic people didn't have the capability of creating a polish like that. They didn't have access to diamond dust or corundum, that kind of material, to be able to create a high polish on granite. So obviously, that was a feature of the construction itself of the boxes.
Well, what do you speculate could have been the use of the boxes, the original purpose?
Well, there is a lot of speculation. Some people think they were energy capacitors, that they were part of a giant underground energetic system. The idea that
Like a
they were
grid?
used as burials for bull. Yeah, like a grid of some kind, almost like a Wi-Fi system, or something that Tesla was working on. Because, why are they underground? Why are there so many of them? Why are there all of these tunnel systems under the Giza Plateau that are interconnecting? Some say the tunnels go as far as Karnak. But as time goes on, getting more and more access to this stuff that before was totally off limits.
And what would the official explanation be regarding, because most of these sites seem to be, reworked by the ancient, the first dynasties of the Egyptians. So what would be the reasoning behind them building the sites and then having to, reconstruct them or rebuild them, just a few years later? Like what would be the case with the Sphinx, with the original, the official explanation?
Well, they don't have an explanation. Is they dodge the question. They say it was done using these tools, which we know isn't true. So they're not being very creative or being very open about the fact that they don't know what they're talking about as regards pre-dynastic work. The same thing with the pre-Inca work. They simply say the Inca did it. The best stonemasons were responsible. They used copper chisels. So it's not up to them to come up with any explanations because they simply don't want to touch the subject matter. So it's up to independent researchers to go and simply expose what it is that we're looking at. And thankfully, there are many more people who are like-minded as like me. I guess quite a few have watched my videos who've gone to Egypt or to Peru, seeing the same thing, documenting it for themselves and showing it to their subscribers. So the information is getting out there and it is accelerating. There's no way to turn it off. I'm very grateful that I'm not the only one who's looking at it. There are people like there's a channel called Uncharted X.
Oh yeah, Ben.
With Ben, and then Jimmy of Bright Insight. Johanna James is another one. We had some on our tour in October who are making videos for YouTube. So, more and more people are not simply looking at it, they're recording it and publishing it, which is great.
Exactly. And I've seen in Instagram and on YouTube also that I've been looking at this for around 6 to 7 years. And maybe when I first started looking at these videos and stuff, when people would say, they weren't made by the Egyptians, most of the other people that would comment below would be like, you're crazy, you're a liar, stop believing in, fake stuff and pseudoscience. But now when someone puts, like a little alien face on it, I don't think they were, extraterrestrial buildings. Maybe, ancient human, pre-cataclysmic, what you talk about, maybe Atlantean time people. But when, people comment those things now, it seems to be more, widely accepted than if a person basically says that the dynastic Egyptians made the pyramids, the rest of the people do laugh them off now, which is something, positive.
Yeah, they do. No, it's great. I'm glad more and more people are waking up to it. Unfortunately, most people who visit and look at ancient Peru, the guides don't know what it is. They don't even show them that stuff because they don't understand it. But as time goes on, more are looking at the evidence, and there are more guides in Peru who believe in the megalithic time frame now than did, as you said, like 5 or so years ago. It was all the brainwashed Inca everything or dynastic Egyptian everything, but people are starting to think more when they're there and ask questions of the guides and say, well, how could they do this compared to how they did that? And some do have answers now, which is great.
I'd seen one person say that, it was easier to build megalithic, in megalithic style and then people started to build in smaller pieces. That would be false, right? Well, how would
Oh yeah.
building in megalithic be easier? And that the
No.
flattening of the surfaces, since the stones were larger, would be way easier than to flatten, a smaller surface. I think that would be even harder.
Well, definitely. The megalithic was beyond the capacity of the Inca. They did not have the technology. The dynastic Egyptian also did not have the technology of efficiently shaping hard stone. They didn't, you know.
And
The Inca, the dynastic Egyptians had the same tools, and not many of them. Like you see a few in, you know, in the museums, but you don't see like thousands of chisels lined up or anything like that. You don't see any examples of a saw that could possibly cut granite. Most of the tools they show you were for woodworking, but they say, well, they were able to cut stone with these tools too. And it's just a dumb statement.
and what I've seen on the the Uncharted X videos is that he shows you that the copper chisels, copper saws, when they would be using them with sand in the middle to create this sort of like you know uh, crushing of the area that would be cut, wouldn't leave the same marks that the stones themselves leave, right? That would be the what is it called? The feed rate
Yeah,
would be totally different, right? Which
no,
is
not at
also
all.
not explained.
Yeah, no, they've done experiments with copper saws and bronze saws with, you know, sand in Egypt, and the penetration was something like a few millimeters maybe, or maximum a centimeter in 8 hours.
Yeah,
You know,
that
like incredibly inefficient. Whereas the striations you see on the stone in Egypt looks like the feed rate was like a way beyond our capacity today. The ability to cut through stone faster than what a diamond saw can do, or a diamond tube drill. That's the
I'd
great
seen
mystery.
I'd read on the in Christopher Dunn's book, The Lost Ancient Technology of Egypt, I believe it's called, that
Mhm.
he shows you how when the saw or whatever material was that was cutting the granite seemed to have been cutting the the quartz faster than the rest of the conglomerate materials, right? When it would when the saw would pass through the quartz, it would seem to cut it even easier than the rest of the material, which would be indicative of something that's not diamond saw. It would be something else. He speculates it was, a vibrational device, maybe.
Mhm.
Have you ever looked at that?
Oh, definitely. Like, yeah, like ultrasonics or something like that, which they're only starting to experiment with now. But whatever these tools were, and you see the same thing at Pumapunku and Tiwanaku, whatever the cutting device was that did this, it didn't distinguish between harder and softer material. It just cut through everything at the same rate, which is, again, not something that that we associate with power tools of today, because there is resistance with harder material. These, whatever these things were, they were just cutting straight through it, irrespective of the hardness of the material.
And in Peru, have you seen any, stones with cut marks, or is it just, these flat surfaces all around that seem to be poured, as some people say?
Um, yeah, I've seen evidence of a few saw marks, but not much. There's quite a good one at the site of Ollantaytambo on a large granite block, but you see hundreds and hundreds of examples in Egypt, but not as much in Peru, and that indicates to me that whatever technology was used in Peru was actually more sophisticated and more mysterious than Egypt. Egypt's very logical. You see drill holes, you see saw marks, we see evidence of saw marks, circular saws, 7 to 8 meters in diameter, and maybe a quarter of a centimeter thick. We don't have material to make a saw blade out of that in the 21st century. But we do see the obvious evidence in the sawing. In Peru, it looks like they had technology to be able to make the stone temporarily in like a marshmallow state. It's quite bizarre, but that's what it looks like. Like they're able to mold it, not with some kind of acid, but temporarily transform it from being solid to being like a
Bland.
sponge-like material, and then back into being a solid state again.
And when sometimes most of the people, the other argument is that in Egypt they were casting the stones as they were doing in Peru, but they dismissed directly all these saw marks that are present in Egypt, right? Because some people say all the buildings in Egypt were also, what do they call it? Geopolymers.
Yeah, there's no evidence of it being geopolymer at all. That was the man who came up with that idea is a Frenchman called Davidowitz, but he doesn't explain why, for example, the Great Pyramid is made of 2.3 to 2.5 million multi-ton blocks, each one a different shape and size. What material would you use in order to make the form to pour this geopolymer concrete into? They didn't have plywood like we have today. So yeah, they can't explain it. The same thing in Peru. There's no evidence of anyone having the capability of grinding hard stone up into a condition where it's almost like flour, which is what you need. It has to be that kind of consistency. It can't be little pieces of stone. It has to be almost like flour consistency. So, I've looked at all of the evidence. I've looked at all the theories of that, and the geopolymer idea, it doesn't work at all.
And in Egypt, it seems to be that they have been using, both techniques, which is used in Egypt and in Peru, because when you go to the Aswan quarry or you see, the unfinished obelisk, they seem to have been using a technology that would soften the stone also, right? Which would indicate, the same technologies used in Africa and in the Americas, right?
Well, it's actually, I think it's a different kind of technology.
Oh yeah,
Sorry, I had to move there for a sec. So yeah,
yeah. There's no
the unfinished obelisk looks like it was some kind of machine that was carving the stone, because you have these scoops in it that are approximately almost exactly 2 feet across, like very consistent all the way up and down the unfinished obelisk and this other obelisk that was unfinished. So that, in comparison to what we see, where we see the technique the dynastic Egyptians would have used in order to break stone, which is having a very hard bronze chisel of some kind, and pounding it into the stone, making a row of notches, then pounding in wooden wedges, pouring hot water, have the wood expand, and then create a crack. We see that all over the Aswan quarry too. But then you see this other completely different technique, which clearly was not done using bronze chisels and wooden wedges, some kind of scooping device.
All right, and the last question that one of the viewers had was, what happened to all the tools? Which is, the question. I have a explanation for it, but I will understand along all the years that passed.
I think whoever did this work did their construction and took the technology with them. I'm not saying it was extraterrestrials, but I don't think, there's the theory that the tools are hiding in the basement of the Cairo Museum or something like that. But I think somebody simply came, constructed, and left. Where to and where from, I don't know.
So, because basically you wouldn't build something and then you just leave the tools lying around. That'd be the logic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and anything that was any complex machinery that would be left behind would have been recycled. Like if it was composed of different parts, you could take the thing apart and recycle, the metal parts for, shovels and axes and swords or something like that. But we don't see any evidence of, there would be thousands of objects that you would find in the museums if that was the case, probably some on display, but we don't see any evidence of that whatsoever. So there is no evidence of where the tools went. Conspiracy theorists would say it's all being hidden away from the public, but as time goes on, I believe that less and less.
And do you believe that the sites in Peru and Egypt were made at the same time by the same people, or were they two different civilizations that built in the same style and then you just left?
I think they were two different civilizations. I think there was also, as we were discussing Easter Island, there was a civilization that was there that may have been the same one that was in Peru. because the style looks quite similar. In terms of time frame, I say minimum 13,000 years ago, because we know that that was the end of the ice age, where there were major cataclysmic events on the planet that would have destroyed any civilization. So I can't say they were contemporary, but they're both, and all the other works like at Petra in Jordan, in India, Baalbek in Lebanon, all a minimum of 13,000 years old, maybe much, much more. But that, I think we can be confident with that now, because there are a lot of other investigators who are saying the same thing.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Brian, for being with me and taking the time to be, here in the interview. So I'm gonna let you go now. Have a wonderful day, and thank you very much. I'll be sending you the video that I said that I'd be working on for your intro.
Okay, and if you could actually send me a copy of this to
Yeah, for
Dropbox or
sure.
something so that I can
Yeah,
post it.
yeah, it'll be recorded. I think it'll be on the cloud of Zoom, so I'll then send it to you via the mail.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.